A groom threw a glass in the face of a black bride at a wedding. What happened next shocked everyone. Subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching this video from. Kayla stood in front of the full-length mirror, the ivory silk of her wedding gown shimmering under the soft light of the bridal suite. Her reflection stared back, elegant, composed, but unable to fully mask the tension simmering just beneath the surface. The lace sleeves hugged her arms delicately, but the weight of expectation felt heavier than the fabric she wore. She adjusted the earrings her mother had given her that morning, a family heirloom passed down through generations, and tried to steady her breathing. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. At least, that's what everyone kept telling her. Her best friend, Jada, swept into the room with a burst of energy, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "You're glowing," she said, handing Kayla a flute and grinning ear to ear. Kayla smiled, grateful for Jada's unwavering positivity, but she couldn't ignore the flutter of unease in her stomach. It had been there for weeks, quiet but persistent, whispering doubts she tried to dismiss. Jada must have sensed it. "Hey." She set her glass down and reached for Kayla's hands. "You're ready for this. You and Ryan love each other, and that's what matters. Don't let his mom or anyone else make you feel otherwise, okay?" Kayla nodded, but Jada's words only reminded her of the cracks she'd been desperately trying to ignore. Ryan's family was old money. Country clubs, charity galas, and multi-generational summer homes in Martha's Vineyard. They were polished, poised, and overwhelmingly white. Kayla, on the other hand, came from a hard-working, middle-class black family that valued education, tradition, and resilience. Her parents had built their lives through grit and determination, and they'd raised her to stand tall in the face of adversity. But standing tall felt harder than ever now. Her parents had voiced their concerns about Ryan early on. "Love isn't always enough," her mother had said more than once, especially when the people around you refused to see it. Her father, ever the pragmatist, had warned her to keep her guard up. "Watch how he handles pressure, Kayla, how he defends you when it counts." At the time, she dismissed their warnings as overprotectiveness. Ryan had been sweet, attentive, and endlessly reassuring. He'd brushed off his mother's thinly veiled jabs and downplayed the tension at family dinners. He'd promised Kayla that once they were married, everything would settle. But as the wedding day loomed closer, Ryan's behavior had shifted. He'd grown more irritable, more defensive whenever Kayla brought up her concerns about his family. "You're reading too much into it," he'd said last week when she mentioned how his mother had completely erased Kayla's input on the seating chart. "She's just excited. You need to give her some grace." Kayla had tried. She'd swallowed her pride, smiled through the discomfort, and told herself that once they were married, they'd be a united front. But now, standing there in her wedding gown, she wasn't so sure. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Her mother stepped inside, radiating quiet strength in a burgundy dress that perfectly complemented her dark skin. "Everyone's ready," she said softly. She studied Kayla's face, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You okay?" Kayla hesitated, but then nodded. "Yeah, just nervous." Her mother didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. Instead, she stepped forward and adjusted the neckline of Kayla's dress, smoothing the fabric with steady hands. "You look beautiful," she said. "No matter what happens today, don't forget who you are." Kayla felt the words settle in her chest, grounding her. She swallowed the lump in her throat and hugged her mother tightly. As her mother left to take her seat, Kayla turned back to Jada. "Let's do this," she said, trying to inject confidence into her voice. Jada grinned and handed her the bouquet. Damn right. The ceremony was set to take place in the garden of an opulent estate owned by Ryan's family. It was the kind of venue people gawked at in magazines. Marble fountains, manicured hedges, and twinkling fairy lights draped across towering oak trees. As Kayla stepped outside, arm in arm with her father, the murmurs began. She caught snippets of conversations as they walked down the aisle. Compliments about her dress tinged with surprise, comments about her beauty laced with condescension. Exotic. Bold choice. She cleans up well. Her father squeezed her arm, as if sensing the weight of every word. Ryan stood at the altar, smiling, but there was something in his eyes. Tension, maybe even guilt, that made Kayla's steps falter for just a moment. She forced herself forward. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. She barely registered the vows, the rings, or the officiant's voice. All she could focus on was the stiffness in Ryan's shoulders and the calculating gaze of his mother. When it was over, Ryan kissed her with the precision of someone performing a task rather than celebrating love. The guests clapped, but Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that they were clapping for a performance rather than a union. As they walked back down the aisle, Ryan leaned in close. "You're doing great," he said, but his voice sounded forced. Kayla smiled for the cameras, but her heart was pounding. The reception was held in a grand hall lined with crystal chandeliers and floral arrangements that looked like they belonged in a palace. Kayla's friends and family huddled together in one corner while Ryan's guests dominated the room, sipping champagne and exchanging pleasantries. Kayla tried to mingle, but the comments kept coming. "You must feel so lucky. I'm sure this is quite the upgrade for you. So brave of you to embrace such a different culture." Ryan didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. Either way, his absence felt louder than any insult. By the time dinner was served, Kayla's nerves were frayed. She clung to Ryan's arm, hoping for reassurance, but he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone and whispering to his mother. When his mother pulled him aside during the speeches, Kayla's stomach twisted. She watched as they argued quietly, Ryan's jaw tightening as his mother gestured toward Kayla. When he returned, his smile was brittle. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Fine," he said curtly, but his hand felt heavy on her back. Kayla swallowed hard, realizing that her parents might have been right. Love wasn't always enough, and as the music started and guests began to dance, Kayla felt the first crack in her perfect day widen into something she could no longer ignore. Kayla stood at the edge of the bridal suite, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped her bouquet. The muffled sound of music drifted in from the garden outside, signaling that the guests were already seated. From the window, she could see them, rows of impeccably dressed men and women, most of whom she barely knew. She focused on the faces she recognized. Her parents, seated near the front with expressions that mirrored her own apprehension, and her closest friends, their encouraging smiles doing little to ease the tightness in her chest. Jada appeared beside her, fixing a loose curl in Kayla's hair. "Ready?" Kayla forced a smile and nodded, but as she took her father's arm and stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of expectation pressed down on her. The garden was breathtaking. Lush greenery, delicate white flowers lining the aisle, and a crystal chandelier hanging from the pergola under which she and Ryan would exchange vows. It was perfect, but it wasn't hers. She hadn't chosen the location. That had been Ryan's mother, Eleanor, who insisted it was tradition. Kayla hadn't picked the decorations either. Eleanor had dismissed her suggestions as too bold and not quite elegant enough. The guest list was overwhelmingly skewed toward Ryan's side. packed with distant relatives and business associates who barely spared Kayla a glance as she walked past. Her father tightened his grip on her arm, sensing her hesitation. "You're strong," he whispered. Kayla straightened her shoulders and forced her legs to keep moving. Ryan was waiting at the altar, looking polished in his tailored suit. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Kayla's chest tightened. She told herself it was nerves, that every couple felt this way right before making such a big commitment. But as she stepped up beside him and took his hands, the icy feel of his skin sent a chill up her spine. The officiant began the ceremony, and Kayla forced herself to focus. She repeated the words as instructed, her voice steady but distant, as though someone else were speaking for her. When it was Ryan's turn to say his vows, she studied his face, searching for the warmth that had drawn her to him in the first place. But there was something else there, a flicker of impatience, maybe even regret. His voice faltered once, but he recovered quickly, finishing his vows with the confidence of someone delivering a rehearsed speech. The guests clapped politely, but Kayla couldn't shake the feeling that they were applauding the performance rather than the promise. Then came the ring exchange. Kayla's hands trembled as she slipped the band onto Ryan's finger. She tried to meet his gaze, but he was already looking out at the crowd, his eyes scanning for someone. His mother. Eleanor sat in the front row, her expression unreadable, though Kayla didn't miss the subtle arch of her brow, as if silently daring Kayla to make a mistake. The officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and Ryan leaned in for the kiss. His lips brushed against hers briefly, too briefly, and then he stepped back, already turning toward the audience as though the hardest part was over. The applause rose, but Kayla barely heard it. As they made their way back down the aisle, Ryan leaned in and whispered, "See, everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. The pressure in her chest was growing, threatening to suffocate her. And when she looked at her parents still seated and watching her with worried eyes, she knew they felt it too. The garden ceremony flowed into cocktail hour, and Kayla found herself swept up in the motions, posing for photos, accepting compliments, and shaking hands with strangers who seemed more interested in networking than celebrating. Ryan stuck close to her at first, but as soon as his mother called him aside, he left without hesitation, leaving Kayla to fend for herself. She tried to mingle, but the comments wore on her. "You're so lucky," one woman said, her smile tight. "Ryan's quite the catch." Another guest, an older man who introduced himself as one of Ryan's father's business partners, leaned in too close. "Exotic beauty like you? He must have fought off half the city to get you." Kayla excused herself and moved toward her parents. Her mother immediately reached for her hand. "Are you okay?" Kayla hesitated. "It's just a lot," she admitted. Her father glanced toward Ryan, who was laughing at something his mother had said. "You let us know if you need anything," he said, his voice low but firm. Before Kayla could respond, Ryan reappeared. "Hey, babe," he said, placing his hand on her lower back. "We should make the rounds." Her parents exchanged a look, but Kayla nodded and followed him. The rest of the evening felt like walking on eggshells. Ryan seemed increasingly distracted, frequently checking his phone and disappearing for stretches of time. Whenever Kayla asked what was wrong, he brushed her off. "You're overthinking," he said at one point, his smile forced. And then there was Eleanor. She hovered nearby all night, interrupting conversations and offering passive-aggressive advice. At one point, she pulled Kayla aside to comment on her dress. "It's lovely, Eleanor said, though her tone suggested otherwise. I wasn't sure about the cut, but it's unique. Kayla forced a smile, but inside the tension built. By the time dinner was served, her nerves were frayed. She clung to Ryan's arm as they moved through the crowd, desperate for some kind of reassurance, but he seemed even more distant. Then came the speeches. Ryan's best man joked about Ryan's wild days and how Kayla must have tamed him, earning laughter from Ryan's side of the room. Kayla's maid of honor spoke about love, resilience, and growth, sentiments that felt out of place in a room full of people who didn't seem to believe in any of those things. As the guests raised their glasses, Kayla caught sight of Eleanor whispering to Ryan. Whatever she said made his jaw tighten, but he didn't look at Kayla. Instead, he drained his champagne and turned away, leaving her standing there, isolated despite the crowd around her. The night wore on, and the music started. Guests filled the dance floor, but Kayla couldn't bring herself to join them. She stood off to the side, watching as Ryan moved easily through the crowd, laughing and smiling as though nothing had happened. When he finally approached her, she tried one last time to bridge the gap. "Are you okay?" she asked. His smile vanished. "I'm fine," he said sharply. "Can we just enjoy the night without you overanalyzing everything?" Kayla flinched. "I'm not." But he was already walking away, leaving her alone in the sea of strangers. And as the music swelled and the room spun around her, Kayla realized that her perfect day was unraveling faster than she could hold it together. Kayla's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of the reception hall as she moved toward the head table, her fingers clutching the bouquet so tightly that the stems pressed painfully into her palm. She could feel her smile wavering, but she held it in place, determined not to let the cracks show. The hall was breathtaking, a space designed to impress with its towering crystal chandeliers, white floral arrangements cascading from gilded stands and tables dressed in silk linens. It looked like a scene from a fairy tale. But as Kayla glanced around the room, it didn't feel magical. Clusters of guests, mostly from Ryan's side, moved through the space, glasses in hand, exchanging small talk and laughter. Her family and friends occupied a few scattered tables near the back, their expressions more subdued. Kayla felt the divide like a physical barrier. Her mother caught her eye and offered a reassuring smile, but Kayla saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her father's gaze flicked toward Ryan's family with a mixture of wariness and disdain. She wasn't imagining it. The division was real. Ryan reappeared at her side, his arm sliding around her waist. "Relax," he said under his breath, leaning close so only she could hear. "You're overthinking again." Kayla stiffened but said nothing. She wanted to believe him, to believe that this unease was just wedding day jitters and not a sign of something deeper. But the words she'd overheard earlier, the whispers about how different she looked and the way people described her as striking, with a tone that felt more like judgment than praise, kept looping in her mind. "Time for introductions," Ryan said, steering her toward one of his uncles, who wore an expensive suit and the air of someone accustomed to being listened to. Kayla extended her hand, but before she could speak, the man interrupted. "Well, look at you," he said, his tone somewhere between admiration and condescension. "You're absolutely stunning. Ryan's lucky to have found someone so unique." Kayla's smile froze. She'd lost count of how many times she'd heard that word tonight. "Thank you," she said politely, withdrawing her hand and excusing herself as quickly as she could. Ryan shot her a look. "That was rude," he muttered as they moved to another table. "I wasn't rude," Kayla snapped, keeping her voice low. I'm just tired of being treated like some novelty." Ryan rolled his eyes. "You're reading into things again." Kayla bit her tongue and let him lead her to the next group. The evening stretched on, a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Kayla kept her smile in place, but inside her frustration grew. Ryan seemed oblivious, too busy basking in the attention of his family and friends to notice how isolated she felt. By the time dinner was served, Kayla's appetite had vanished. She picked at her plate, forcing herself to nod along as Ryan's cousin talked about their family's long-standing influence in the city. Eleanor hovered nearby, offering commentary whenever Kayla tried to contribute to the conversation. "It's natural to feel a little out of place," she said at one point, patting Kayla's hand like she was a child. "These gatherings can be overwhelming, especially for someone not used to them." Kayla's jaw tightened, but she smiled through it. She'd expected some resistance from Eleanor. There had been hints of it from the moment Ryan introduced them, but tonight felt like something else entirely. It wasn't just disapproval, it was control, and Ryan was letting it happen. When the speeches began, Kayla braced herself. The best man's speech was lighthearted, filled with stories of Ryan's bachelor days and jokes about how Kayla had tamed him. The guests laughed, but Kayla felt her stomach twist. Her maid of honor, Jada, tried to bring warmth to the room with a heartfelt speech about love and partnership, but Kayla could feel the distance. It was as if the two halves of the room were at war. One side celebrating tradition and legacy, the other side clinging to sincerity and hope. And Kayla was caught in the middle. When the dancing started, she tried to lose herself in the music, but Ryan was pulled away almost immediately by his mother. Kayla watched as they talked in hushed tones, Eleanor's hand gesturing toward her with sharp precision. Ryan's expression shifted from irritation to resignation, and when he finally returned, his face was tight. "Everything okay?" Kayla asked, already dreading the answer. Ryan hesitated. "We need to talk," he said. Kayla's heart sank. "Now?" "Yes, now," he snapped, grabbing her arm and leading her toward a quieter corner of the hall. Guests turned to watch, and Kayla felt the heat of their stares burning into her back. "What's going on?" she demanded when they were out of earshot. "My mother says you've been rude to her all day," Ryan said, his voice low but sharp. Kayla blinked, stunned. "What? I haven't—" "She said you rolled your eyes at her during the ceremony," Ryan interrupted, "and that you've been giving her attitude all night." Kayla's breath caught. "Ryan, that's not true. I've done everything I can to be polite." Then why would she lie? Kayla stared at him, her heart pounding. "Because she doesn't want this wedding to happen. She never did." Ryan's face darkened. "Don't start that. It's the truth." "Lower your voice," he hissed. "You're making a scene." Kayla looked around. People were already watching. "I can't believe you're doing this right now," she said, her voice shaking. Ryan leaned closer. "You're embarrassing me." Kayla stepped back. "Embarrassing you? Your mother has been undermining me all night, and now you're taking her side? She's my mother. And I'm your wife." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Ryan's hand tightened around his champagne glass. Before Kayla could react, he hurled it to the ground. The glass shattered, and the room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and Kayla felt every eye turn toward them. Ryan's chest heaved, his face flushed with anger. "Happy now?" he muttered, stepping back. Kayla's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Instead, she turned and walked away, her heels echoing against the marble floor. The crowd parted as she passed, whispers trailing behind her. Kayla didn't stop until she reached the doors, her heart hammering in her chest. She pushed them open and stepped outside, the cool night air hitting her like a slap. She was shaking, but not from fear, from rage. And as she looked back at the hall, where the sounds of chaos and raised voices filtered out into the night, she made a decision. This wasn't over. Not yet. The night air did little to cool the heat burning beneath Kayla's skin as she stood outside the reception hall. The muffled sound of voices spilled out behind her, growing louder as the shock of the shattered glass gave way to hurried whispers and gasps. She forced herself to take a steadying breath, but it didn't stop her hands from trembling. This wasn't how her wedding was supposed to end. Her fingers still clutched the bouquet, its stems bent and bruised from how tightly she'd held it throughout the night. She let it drop, the flowers landing soundlessly on the stone steps at her feet. The symbol of her new life, broken and discarded. The door behind her burst open, and Ryan's voice cut through the night. "Kayla!" She turned to see him storming toward her, his tie loosened and his jaw clenched so tightly that the veins in his neck stood out. "Don't walk away from me," he snapped. Kayla held her ground. "I'm not walking away." "You threw a glass at me, Ryan, in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what that looked like?" "It wasn't at you," he said, waving his hands wildly. "I threw it at the ground because I was angry, not at you. And you're the one who embarrassed me first, snapping at me like that in front of my family." Kayla couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Embarrassed you? Your mother has been humiliating me all day, and instead of defending me, you joined her." Ryan ran his hands through his hair and paced in front of her. "You're overreacting, Kayla. She didn't humiliate you. She's trying to make this work. But you keep looking for reasons to be offended. It's exhausting." Kayla's voice shook. "Exhausting? Do you have any idea how it felt to stand there and listen to people talk about me like I was some outsider who didn't belong? Do you know what it's like to be treated like a trophy instead of a person? No, you don't, because you don't have to deal with it." Ryan's face twisted. "So now you're playing the victim? That's rich." Kayla recoiled, the sting of his words cutting deeper than she expected. "You know what?" she said, her voice steadier this time. "I'm done. I can't do this with you. Not tonight." She turned to leave, but Ryan grabbed her arm, his grip firm. "You're not leaving," he said, his voice low and sharp. Kayla yanked her arm free and glared at him. "Don't touch me." The door opened again, and this time it was Eleanor who stepped outside, flanked by a few guests who lingered near the entrance, clearly eager for more drama. "What is going on out here?" Eleanor demanded, her voice cutting through the air like a blade. Kayla's pulse quickened. She wasn't in the mood to deal with Eleanor, not after the day she'd had, but the older woman didn't wait for an answer. "I can't believe you're causing this scene at your own wedding," Eleanor said, her tone dripping with condescension. "You've done nothing but make this day about yourself, Kayla. My son deserves better than this spectacle." Kayla's breath caught. "A spectacle? Your son just shattered a glass on the floor in front of everyone, and I'm the one causing a scene?" "You pushed him to it," Eleanor shot back. "You've been disrespectful and ungrateful from the start. I tried to give you the benefit of the doubt, but clearly I was wrong about you." The words stung, but Kayla forced herself to stand tall. "No," she said, "you never gave me the benefit of the doubt. You made up your mind about me the second you saw the color of my skin." Gasps echoed from the doorway, but Eleanor's face remained impassive. "How dare you accuse me of something like that?" she hissed. You don't belong in this family and you never will." Kayla's voice didn't waver this time. "I don't want to be in your family. Not if it means being treated like this." She turned to Ryan, searching his face for any sign of regret or apology, but all she saw was anger. "So that's it?" he said. "You're just going to walk out? After everything we've been through?" Kayla let out a bitter laugh. "Everything we've been through? You mean the months I spent bending over backward to make your family like me? The countless times I bit my tongue to keep the peace? Or maybe you mean the moment you chose to humiliate me in front of all these people instead of standing by me?" Ryan's face reddened. "Don't turn this around on me." "Why not?" Kayla said. "You've been doing it to me all night." Eleanor stepped closer, her expression triumphant. "If you leave now, don't bother coming back." Kayla met her gaze, her chin held high. "I won't." The crowd behind them had grown, their whispers swirling around Kayla as she turned and walked away. Her heels clicked against the pavement, but this time the sound didn't feel like defeat. It felt like freedom. She made it to the parking lot before her best friend, Jada, caught up to her. "Kayla!" Jada's voice was sharp with concern as she grabbed Kayla's arm. "What the hell happened back there?" Kayla stopped, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. "He humiliated me," she said, her voice cracking. "He let her humiliate me." Jada's expression hardened. "You're not going back in there." "No," Kayla said, "I'm not." Jada didn't let go. "Then let's go. You're staying with me tonight." Kayla hesitated, glancing back toward the hall. The music had started again, but she knew the whispers wouldn't stop. She turned back to Jada. "Okay." As they drove away, Kayla stared out the window, the night blurring past her. Her wedding dress felt suffocating now, a reminder of how quickly the day had unraveled. But as the distance grew between her and the reception hall, something shifted inside her. She wasn't broken, not yet. And as Jada's car sped down the road, Kayla felt the first flicker of something new. Resolve. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The drive to Jada's apartment felt endless. Kayla sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the streaks of light from passing cars. Her wedding dress, crumpled around her legs, felt heavier with each passing mile. She gripped the edge of the seat to stop her hands from trembling. Jada's voice broke through the hum of the tires on asphalt. "You're sure you don't want to call your parents?" Kayla shook her head, her throat too tight to speak. She couldn't bear to hear the disappointment in her mother's voice, or the quiet anger she knew would simmer beneath her father's. Not yet. Jada reached over and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay. We'll figure this out." Kayla wanted to believe her, but the weight of what had just happened pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She replayed the scene at the reception hall over and over, the shatter of the glass, the sharpness in Ryan's voice, the triumph in Eleanor's eyes, and the whispers. She could still hear them. By the time they pulled into Jada's parking lot, Kayla's hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a strange, empty stillness. Jada led her inside, flicking on the lights and pulling blankets from the couch. "Sit," she said, pushing Kayla gently onto the cushions. "I'll get you something to drink." Kayla didn't argue. She sat there, staring down at her bare hands, the weight of the abandoned bouquet still imprinted in her palms. Jada returned with tea and a plate of crackers. "You need to eat." Kayla shook her head. "I can't." "You have to," Jada insisted. "You're not falling apart tonight, not after what you just did." Kayla looked up. "What do you mean?" Jada set the plate down and crossed her arms. "You stood up for yourself, Kayla. I saw it. Everyone saw it. Do you know how many people would have stayed, smiled for the cameras, pretended like nothing happened? Kayla let out a bitter laugh. And look where it got me. I'm sitting in your apartment in a wedding dress I'll never wear again. Good, Jada snapped. You don't need that dress, you don't need him, and you sure as hell don't need his mother. Kayla blinked, startled by the force in her friend's voice. Jada softened. Listen, I know it hurts, but you did the right thing. Now you just have to keep doing it. Kayla swallowed, her throat dry. What if I can't? You can, Jada said firmly, and you're not doing it alone. The words settled something inside Kayla, anchoring her just enough to stop the spiral of panic that had been threatening to pull her under. For the rest of the night, she let Jada talk. About work, about funny stories from college, about anything but what had just happened. She let herself breathe, but when the apartment finally fell silent and Jada disappeared into her bedroom, Kayla sat alone in the dark, the events of the night creeping back in. Her phone vibrated on the table. She reached for it automatically, but froze when she saw Ryan's name on the screen. She let it ring. Then it rang again, and again. Finally, she turned it off and threw it across the couch. The next morning, Kayla woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Jada talking on the phone. Yeah, she's here, Jada was saying. No, she's not going back there. Kayla sat up, her body aching from a night of restless sleep. Jada hung up and turned to her. Your mom's been calling. I told her you're okay. Kayla's stomach sank. Did you tell her? No, Jada said quickly. I figured that's your call. Kayla nodded, relieved. She wasn't ready to face her parents yet, but she couldn't avoid the rest of it. She turned her phone back on and winced as the notifications flooded in. Missed calls, voicemails, and texts. Ryan's messages started out apologetic. Baby, please come back. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking. Then they turned angry. You're making this worse than it has to be. Just talk to me. And finally, threatening. You can't just run away. You're my wife now. You're not going anywhere. Kayla's hands shook as she scrolled through them, but it was the last one that made her stomach drop. I'll find you, Kayla. You can't hide forever. She turned the phone toward Jada. Jada's expression hardened. We're saving all of this. Every text, every voicemail. Kayla nodded, but her chest felt tight. Ryan had never been violent before last night, never even raised his voice like that. But now, looking at those messages, she wondered if she'd ever really known him at all. The rest of the day passed in a blur of calls to lawyers and consultations about protective orders. Kayla's parents finally showed up at Jada's apartment, demanding answers, and she broke down as she told them everything. Her father's hands clenched into fists, but it was her mother's quiet fury that scared Kayla the most. We're not letting this go, her mother said, and neither are you. By the time evening came, Kayla felt like she'd been wrung out. But as she sat on Jada's couch, surrounded by her parents and her best friend, something shifted inside her. She wasn't just running anymore. She was preparing for a fight. And this time, she wasn't going to let Ryan or his mother win. Kayla sat at Jada's kitchen table, her eyes fixed on the screen of her phone as yet another notification popped up. It was from an unknown number, but the message was unmistakably from Ryan. We need to talk. You can't avoid this forever. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't replied to any of his texts or calls since leaving the reception, but that hadn't stopped him from finding ways to reach her. First, it was through his own number, then his mother's. Now it was coming from random numbers she didn't recognize. The messages followed a pattern. Apologies that quickly shifted to accusations, followed by demands and thinly veiled threats. Jada walked into the kitchen, a cup of coffee in her hand, and immediately noticed the look on Kayla's face. "Is it him again?" Kayla nodded and pushed the phone toward her. Jada read the message, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I told you to block these numbers." "I did. He keeps finding new ones," Kayla said, her voice hollow. Jada set the coffee down and picked up Kayla's phone, scrolling through the messages. "We need to go to the police." Kayla swallowed hard. "I don't know if I can handle that yet." Jada leaned across the table. "Kayla, listen to me. This isn't going to stop unless we make it stop. You saw what he did at the wedding. You saw how his mother backed him up like it was no big deal. He's not going to back off just because you ignore him." Kayla's hands tightened around the edge of the table. She hated how weak she felt, like she was stuck in a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. "I'll go with you," Jada added softly. "We'll take everything. His texts, the voicemails, the screenshots. It's all evidence." Kayla exhaled slowly, nodding. "Okay, let's do it." The police station was cold and impersonal, but the officer they spoke with, a woman named Detective Harris, listened carefully as Kayla explained what had happened. She flinched when Kayla described how Ryan had thrown the glass at her feet, but her face remained calm and professional. "This isn't something we take lightly," Harris said, flipping through the messages Kayla had saved. "We'll document everything and start the process for a restraining order. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "She's staying with me," Jada said firmly. Harris nodded. "Good. But I still recommend keeping your doors locked and letting your neighbors know to be on the lookout. We'll also flag his name in case he tries anything." The weight in Kayla's chest didn't lift completely, but it eased slightly. Having someone in authority take her seriously, validate her fear, made her feel less alone. After they left the station, Kayla turned her phone off completely. It was the first time in days that she felt like she could breathe. But the relief didn't last long. The next morning, Jada shook Kayla awake, her face pale. "You need to see this." Kayla sat up and took the phone Jada handed her. It was a news article. "Wedding Day Disaster. Groom's Violent Outburst Goes Viral." Kayla's stomach dropped. She clicked the link and immediately regretted it. The article was accompanied by a video taken at the reception, showing Ryan throwing the glass and shouting at her. The angle caught everything: his rage, Eleanor's smug expression, and Kayla's stunned reaction before she walked out. The comments were brutal. "She should have seen the red flags before the wedding. Looks like someone married into the wrong family. Good for her for walking out. No one deserves that." Jada snatched the phone away. "Don't read that garbage. People love drama, but this isn't about them. It's about you." Kayla buried her face in her hands. "I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this." Jada crouched beside her. "You didn't make this happen, Kayla. He did." The next few days were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and calls from family and friends who had seen the video. Kayla's parents were furious, not just at Ryan, but at themselves for not seeing the signs sooner. Her father insisted on installing security cameras at Jada's apartment, while her mother called every lawyer she knew to make sure Kayla was protected. But the hardest part was hearing from Ryan's sister. "I'm so sorry," the voicemail said. "I've seen this before, how he is with women. But Mom always covered for him. I should have warned you. Please, don't go back to him." Kayla listened to it twice before deleting it. She wasn't going back. The turning point came when Jada convinced her to see a therapist. At first, Kayla resisted, embarrassed by the idea of needing help. But during their first session, as she described the slow erosion of her confidence, the constant need to prove herself to Ryan's family, and the moment he shattered the glass at her feet, something shifted. Her therapist called it trauma. Kayla called it survival. Over the next few weeks, she began to rebuild. She stayed at Jada's while searching for her own apartment. She filed the restraining order and started collecting evidence for the divorce. And she blocked every number Ryan tried to use to contact her. But the most important thing she did was let herself feel angry. Angry at Ryan for betraying her. Angry at Eleanor for manipulating him. Angry at herself for not seeing it sooner. And with that anger came clarity. One night, while scrolling through her messages, Kayla found one from Ryan she hadn't deleted yet. "You can't hide forever." Instead of deleting it, she took a screenshot and sent it to her lawyer. By the time the restraining order was approved, Kayla felt stronger than she had in weeks. She wasn't afraid of Ryan anymore. She was ready to fight back. The first thing she did was hire movers to collect her belongings from the house she and Ryan had shared. With the police there to supervise, she walked through each room, reclaiming what was hers. Eleanor was there, of course, watching with narrowed eyes as Kayla packed her things. "This isn't over," Eleanor hissed as Kayla walked past her. Kayla paused at the door and turned to face her. "Yes, it is." And for the first time, she believed it. As she loaded the last box into the truck and climbed into the driver's seat, Kayla glanced at the rearview mirror. The house that was supposed to be her home faded into the distance, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't look back. Kayla stood in the middle of her new apartment, surrounded by boxes and half-assembled furniture. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard, and sunlight streamed in through the large windows, warming the wooden floors. It wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom with white walls and creaky pipes, but it was hers. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. The move had been chaotic. Her parents and Jada had insisted on helping, hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs and double-checking the locks on every door and window. Her father even installed a chain lock, muttering about extra security, while her mother unpacked dishes and fussed over whether Kayla had enough groceries. She'd barely had time to process it all before Jada showed up with champagne and a celebratory "Welcome Home" banner. But now, as the quiet settled around her, Kayla felt the full weight of the moment. She wasn't running anymore. She was rebuilding. The wedding dress, stuffed in the back of her closet in a garment bag, was the only remnant of her old life she hadn't thrown away or donated. She wasn't sure why she'd kept it. Maybe as a reminder of what she'd escaped, or maybe because a part of her still needed closure. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. It was Jada. "Checking in. How's the new place? Need anything?" Kayla smiled. "All good, just settling in." She set the phone down and wandered to the window, looking out at the street below. The city felt bigger from up here, noisy and chaotic, but also alive in a way that matched her own determination to start over. Her thoughts were interrupted by another buzz. This time it wasn't Jada, it was Ryan. Or rather another unknown number that she immediately recognized as him. "I saw your apartment online. Cute. Do you think a lock's going to keep me out?" The blood drained from Kayla's face. She stared at the screen, her fingers trembling as she took a screenshot and sent it to her lawyer. Her phone rang almost immediately. It was Jada. "Are you okay?" Jada asked before Kayla could even speak. Kayla nodded, even though Jada couldn't see her. He texted me again. I'm coming over. No, Kayla said quickly. I'm fine. I already sent it to the lawyer. They're filing it with the restraining order paperwork. Kayla, I'm fine. She wasn't, not really, but she needed to be. She couldn't let Ryan or his threats keep her frozen. Call me if you need anything, Jada said reluctantly. I will. Kayla hung up and took a shaky breath. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. Instead, she picked up the pepper spray and a personal alarm Jada had given her and tucked them into her purse. Then she walked to the door, double-checking the locks. This was her space, and she wasn't going to let him take that away from her. The next few days passed in a blur of unpacking and settling in. Kayla focused on small tasks, hanging curtains, organizing closets, and arranging the mismatched furniture she'd picked up from thrift stores and donations. Work became a refuge. Her boss had quietly shifted her desk away from the windows and instructed the receptionist to screen all visitors. Her co-workers rallied around her, creating a protective barrier of support that made her feel less exposed. One afternoon, Kayla found a small box on her desk. Inside was a canister of pepper spray and a personal alarm, another one this time from her co-workers. The note read, "We've got your back." Kayla smiled, blinking back tears, but the messages from Ryan didn't stop. Even with the restraining order in place, he found ways to get to her. Emails from burner accounts, letters left in her mailbox, and even notes slipped under her door. The police were helpful, but Ryan always seemed to stay just on the edge of what was legally actionable. "You're doing everything right," her lawyer assured her during one of their meetings. "The restraining order is strong, and we've documented every violation. He's digging himself into a hole." But that didn't make the fear go away. One night, Kayla woke to the sound of footsteps outside her door. Her heart pounded as she reached for her phone, but by the time the police arrived, the hallway was empty. "It could have been anyone," the officer said, though his tone wasn't convincing. Kayla knew, and that was the night she decided she needed to be stronger. She signed up for self-defense classes at a local gym, determined to take back the power Ryan had tried to strip from her. She threw herself into training, pushing her body until her muscles ached and her confidence started to return. Her therapist noticed the change immediately. "You look different today," she said during one session. "More grounded." Kayla nodded. "I think I'm finally ready to stop being afraid." But just when she started to feel safe again, the past came crashing back. One afternoon, while scrolling through social media, Kayla stumbled across a post from Ryan's mother. It was a long, rambling tirade about false accusations and vindictive women, and though Kayla's name wasn't mentioned, it was obvious who the post was about. The comments were divided, some defending Ryan, others tearing him apart. But what shook Kayla most was the number of strangers weighing in on her life. Jada called as soon as she saw it. "Ignore it," she said. "She's just desperate." But Kayla couldn't ignore it. Instead, she did something she never thought she'd do. She posted her own statement, sharing her side of the story and thanking the people who had supported her. She included screenshots of the threats Ryan had sent and mentioned the restraining order. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in, some from women who had been through similar situations, others offering encouragement and solidarity. And for the first time, Kayla felt like she wasn't alone. The next week, her lawyer called with good news. "The restraining order is permanent," he said, "and Ryan's losing his job." His company started an internal investigation after the video went viral, and it turns out this isn't the first complaint against him. Kayla felt a strange mix of relief and sadness. She didn't want revenge, she just wanted to move on. But as she sat in her apartment that night, surrounded by the pieces of her new life, she knew she was finally free. And she wasn't going to let anyone take that away from her again. Kayla sat on the floor of her apartment, surrounded by half-empty boxes and stacks of papers that marked the remnants of the legal battle she'd finally won. The room was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old pipes in the walls. She reached for the last box, marked Memories, and hesitated before opening it. Inside were wedding invitations that had never been sent, thank you cards still in their wrappers, and a framed photo of her and Ryan during their engagement shoot. She stared at the photo, her fingers hovering over the glass. They'd looked so happy that day, laughing in the sunlight, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist. It was hard to believe that the man in the photo was the same one who had shattered a glass at her feet and threatened her with messages that still haunted her dreams. Kayla set the frame aside and pulled out the wedding dress, still zipped inside its garment bag. She'd avoided looking at it for weeks. But now, as she unzipped the bag and let the fabric spill out onto the floor, she felt nothing. No sadness. No longing. Just finality. A knock at the door broke her trance. "It's open," she called. Jada stepped inside, holding a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I come bearing gifts," she said with a grin, but her expression softened when she saw the dress spread out on the floor. "Are we burning it? Because I brought matches." Kayla laughed, a real laugh for the first time in what felt like forever. "Not yet. I thought about donating it." "To what? A haunted house?" Kayla snorted, shaking her head. "No, a women's shelter. Maybe someone can turn it into something beautiful." Jada's eyes softened. "That's perfect." They sat on the couch, glasses in hand, and Jada raised hers. "To new beginnings." Kayla clinked her glass against Jada's. "To never looking back." The wine was sweet, and for the first time Kayla let herself savor the taste without worrying about what came next. But the peace didn't last long. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table and Jada grabbed it before Kayla could. "Don't. Whatever it is, it can wait." Kayla reached for the phone, but Jada pulled it away. "It's him, isn't it?" Jada asked, her voice tight. Kayla froze, but when she finally grabbed the phone and looked at the screen, it wasn't Ryan. It was her lawyer. "Case closed. Restraining order is final. No more loopholes." Relief washed over her so suddenly that she felt lightheaded. She handed the phone to Jada, who read the message and let out a triumphant whoop. "He can't touch you now," Jada said, pulling Kayla into a hug. "You did it." Kayla let herself exhale, the tension she'd been carrying for months finally starting to ease. The next morning, Kayla woke up to sunlight streaming through the windows and the sound of birds outside. It felt different, like waking up after a storm and realizing the sky was clear again. She made coffee and sat on the tiny balcony overlooking the street. The city felt alive in a way it hadn't before. She watched people rushing to work, parents walking their kids to school, and joggers weaving through traffic. Life kept moving, and so would she. Her phone buzzed again, this time a text from her boss. "We need to talk about your promotion. Seattle office still interested?" Kayla stared at the message. She'd almost forgotten about the offer, buried under weeks of legal battles and emotional recovery. The idea of leaving the city, leaving all the memories behind, was tempting. She texted back, "Can we talk later today?" An hour later, she sat in her manager's office, her hands folded tightly in her lap as he outlined the details. It wasn't just a promotion. It was a chance to lead her own team. A chance to start over in a new city where no one knew her as the bride from the viral video. When he finished, she didn't hesitate. "I'll take it." The weeks leading up to the move were a blur. Kayla packed up her apartment, sold what she didn't need, and threw away anything that reminded her of Ryan. The wedding dress was donated to the shelter, and the photo of their engagement shoot went into the trash. Her parents threw her a going-away party, and Jada promised to visit as soon as Kayla was settled. But the hardest part was saying goodbye to the version of herself that had walked down that aisle, full of hope and love, only to have it all come crashing down. She wasn't that woman anymore, and as she boarded the plane to Seattle, she didn't look back. 3 months later, Kayla stood on the balcony of her new apartment, watching the sun set over Puget Sound. The air smelled like salt water and rain, and the view stretched endlessly in every direction. Her phone buzzed, and she picked it up to see a text from Jada. Guess what? Ryan's engaged again. Kayla felt a pang of pity for the woman who had taken her place, but it didn't last long. "Don't worry," Jada's next text said. "I sent her the video." Kayla smiled. She hoped the woman listened, but if she didn't, Kayla knew she couldn't save her. She could only save herself. That night, Kayla pulled out the journal her mom had given her before the wedding, the one she'd been too afraid to write in until now. She flipped to the first blank page and picked up a pen. "Dear Diary, 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. Today, I know it was just beginning. I walked away from a man who tried to break me, and I rebuilt myself from the ground up. I'm not a victim. I'm not a survivor. I'm just me, stronger, wiser, and finally free." She closed the journal and looked out at the horizon. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and for the first time in months, Kayla felt at peace. Her story wasn't over. It was just getting started. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new videos. Share this video with your friends and leave comments. I care about your opinion. Watch the next and other videos on the channel. There are many more interesting stories to come.